Great. Thank you, Simeon. As Charmaine said, I'm Abi, and it is a real pleasure to be here this evening and to be able to share some of the thoughts and reflections I've had whilst reading and learning about this passage. Proverbs is one of the wisdom books of the Bible. The Bible Project neatly summarizes it as being the accumulated insight of God's people that has been passed down through generations. So this is a really valuable book that we can read and learn from. Tonight we're looking at Agur's bold prayer in chapter 30, verses 7 to 9, which has just been read to us. I've divided this talk into 3 sections. Firstly, where do we get our wisdom? Secondly, can we control our happiness? And thirdly, a lifetime of bread, but given day to day. Now, before we dig into these, the key point I want you all to hear is this. Having all of the things you want will not make you happy. That might sound like a bold claim right now, but if you bear with me, hopefully you'll come to understand what I mean. Firstly, where do we get our wisdom? This passage acknowledges that we are called to think for ourselves, which is a really beautiful thing. We're given the gift of learning things about ourselves, the people, and the world around us. However, there's also a seemingly infinite amount of information, which might seem obvious, but I've found some statistics to help us understand the scale of this. We are actually living in a time referred to as the information explosion. There are 30,000 podcast episodes published every day. Over 10,000 books are published every week. By the end of this year, there will be 180 zettabytes of information stored around the world. If you were to put all of this onto Blu-ray discs and line them up, it would stretch to the moon and back over 23 times, which is the equivalent of 11 million miles. I hope we can all appreciate there is a lot of information out there. Not only is there a lot of information, but so much of it is accessible to us. This does create a bit of a challenge as we need to be able to discern what is true and also what information we look to as a good model of how to live our lives. Each one of us in the room here and online is exposed to this information, whether intentionally through reading books and listening to podcasts, or also unintentionally through advertising and social media. And we all need to be aware of what information is shaping the way we see the world and the way we behave. There's a lot to be said on this topic, and earlier this year there was a sermon series called Deeply Formed. So I'd recommend listening to some of those podcasts or reading the book by Rich Villodas if you want a deeper dive into this topic. But to put it briefly, we all need to be careful about where we look to for our information and our wisdom. In our passage, in the first part of Agur's prayer in verse 7, he prays that God keeps falsehood and lies far from him. I'd go as far to say that this is a prayer we need just as much, or maybe even more so today, than when Agur first prayed that prayer. So where do we get our wisdom from? Looking to God and reading the Bible is obviously a great place to start. One important difference between now and the time when Agur was praying this prayer is that we now live in a post-Jesus world. We have the best possible example of how to live a good life modeled in the life of Jesus. We can also learn a lot from each other through sharing experience and insight, as well as lovingly challenging each other when we hear things that don't align with the fundamental truths we read about in the Bible. Don't get me wrong, books and podcasts are great. We just need to be intentional about what we consume. Choosing people who are qualified to speak on certain subjects and taking recommendations from good and trusted role models is a great place to start. To summarize, the joy of being able to think for ourselves comes with a safety warning. Looking to the Bible and learning from wisdom that's been passed down through generations is a really good place to start. Secondly, can we control our happiness? In the middle of the prayer in verse 8, Agur prays that God gives him neither poverty or riches. I think this speaks into the idea of contentment. of appreciating the things you have without letting the desire for more things take away from that enjoyment. This attitude has the power to influence our feeling of satisfaction and ultimately our happiness. Reading this passage, I was reminded of a great talk I heard earlier this year at a Christian conference. Arthur Brooks is a professor of happiness at Harvard Business School, which I reckon has to be one of the best job titles out there. One of his most widely recognized ideas is that happiness is a result of three things: enjoyment, meaning, and satisfaction. Enjoyment is when we experience pleasure with other people, and this leads to pleasant memories. Meaning is found when you come to learn your why. What makes you click? What gifts and interests can you bless the people and the world around you with? Satisfaction is the one I find most interesting. This can be achieved after accomplishing a goal when you've put in effort. But another key element of satisfaction is something called the haves and the wants formula. This is where the amount of satisfaction you feel can be changed depending on the number of your haves and how that compares to the number of your wants. If you want many more things than you have, you're going to feel far less satisfied. In this formula, it's often hard to change the things we have, but we can change the things we want. Agur prays for enough, but not too much. If we each take a moment to reflect on the things we want, what are they? How do they compare to what we have? Do we want the freedom to leave our house and enjoy the world around us? The ability to offer hospitality and enjoy food with friends? Access to transport that enables us to explore the world around us? Or is it another job promotion, more holidays, a house with a bigger garden? It's a bold prayer to be content. It challenges us to evaluate the things we think we need in order to be happy. It challenges us to reflect and appreciate the many blessings that God gives us every day. Thirdly, a lifetime of bread, but given day to day. Agur prays in verse 8 that God would give him only his daily bread. If you come to church often, it's likely you will say a similar line as part of the Lord's Prayer, as we did this evening. We often say it here at St. George's as part of the prayers or during communion. But how often do we really think about what we are asking for? This prayer is that God will give us what we need when we need it. Enough of any one thing to sustain us. And this will look very different at different times in our life. I will admit that I like being able to plan ahead. I enjoy being able to prepare and anticipate what is next in order to feel in control. The issue here is that so many things are out of our control. And whilst I can make decisions with the information I have at the time, there's no way I can ever be fully prepared for the future. The unexpected thing I've realized when reflecting on this is that this uncertainty of life gives it a certain beauty. Whilst there's a part of me that would love to know exactly what will happen in the future, for example, what job opportunities will be available when my fixed-term contract ends next October, or whether I should go for a 12 or a 24-month fixed-term Wi-Fi deal, the reality is, if we knew exactly how our life is going to play out, it would be incredibly boring. There's a joy that comes from the unexpected. Is it weird to have a favorite word? I'm not sure, but one of mine is serendipity. This means an unplanned, fortunate discovery, and I think it perfectly illustrates this beauty of the unexpected. Whilst we do have a responsibility to be wise with the resources and opportunities we're presented with, it is often the surprises that make life interesting and exciting. The good news here is that we can live in this uncertainty, knowing that God is with us each day of our lives, and that he will continue to give us what we need when we need it. To summarize, Agur prays a prayer that has a big implication. In verse 8 alone, he says, "Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread." Rather than being overwhelmed by the amount of information that is out there or distracted by the latest trending idea, we can focus on God and the timeless example that Jesus sets in the Bible. Rather than falling into the trap of fixing our eyes on the never-ending list of things we think we want, which we think will make us happy, we can focus on the meaningful things and remember to slow down to enjoy life with the people around us. Rather than being distracted and trapped by worries about the future, we can trust in God's provision. He knows what we need when we need it, far better than we could ever anticipate ourselves. This is advice that has been passed down through generations of Christians, and it's just as relevant today as it has ever been. My prayer tonight is that each of us is bold enough to pray our own version of this prayer, with the goal of recentering our ambitions and aspirations in the light of God's character, and that each of us can find a peace and joy in this truth. Let me end with this. What things in your life right now are bringing you happiness?